Grand Plaza Mall was alive with energy, its glass doors swinging open and shut as shoppers streamed in and out. The air buzzed with the sounds of laughter, cheerful chatter, and the occasional ring of a cash register. Aromas from the food court, a mix of freshly baked pretzels and sizzling fried chicken, wafted through the wide halls, tempting even those who weren't hungry. Among the crowd, a figure moved with quiet determination, a stark contrast to the bustling chaos around him. Samuel, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, navigated the space with his cane, tapping methodically against a tiled floor. His glasses, dark and opaque, hid the eyes that no longer saw the vibrant world he once knew. Yet, his other senses painted a vivid picture of his surroundings. The echo of footsteps, the rustle of shopping bags, the faint jingling of keys. Today wasn't just another day for Samuel. He had ventured to the mall to buy a gift for his niece, who had been counting down the days to her birthday. He knew exactly what he wanted. A bracelet from her favorite jewelry store, something simple yet meaningful. Despite the challenges that came with his blindness, Samuel had always prided himself on his independence. He didn't want to trouble others for help with something he could manage on his own. But as he made his way through the mall, carefully counting his steps, an uneasy feeling tugged at the edge of his mind. He could sense the occasional stares, the subtle shifts in the air as people stepped aside to let him pass. It wasn't unusual. Being blind often made him a spectacle, though unintentionally. Still, he shrugged it off, focusing on the rhythmic taps of his cane and the mental map he had created of the mall's layout. Unbeknownst to Samuel, not everyone in the crowd viewed him with silent curiosity or indifference. A pair of eyes had locked onto him, watching his every move with suspicion. Carl, the mall's head of security, leaned against a wall near the food court, his arms crossed. His gaze followed Samuel, narrowing as the blind man approached. Carl had seen it all during his tenure. Shoplifters, pickpockets, and troublemakers of every kind. To him, Samuel's cautious movements didn't evoke empathy, but skepticism. Loitering, Carl muttered, under his breath, shaking his head. Looks like he's up to something. As Samuel reached the edge of the food court, the aroma of cinnamon rolls and coffee briefly clouding his senses, Carl stepped forward. The faint sound of heavy boots on tile reached Samuel's ears, but he kept moving, unaware that he was about to become the center of an unfolding storm. What happened next would send ripples through the crowded mall, leaving strangers united in outrage, and Samuel at the heart of an encounter he never anticipated. Carl adjusted the brim of his security cap, his eyes narrowing as he tracked Samuel's slow, deliberate movements. The food court bustled around him. Families juggled trays of burgers and fries, teenagers laughed over shared milkshakes, and toddlers begged for ice cream. Yet Carl's focus remained fixed on Samuel, a man he had already judged in his mind. Carl took pride in his role as head of security, though his approach often leaned toward overzealousness. In his years patrolling the mall, he had built a reputation for being stern, unyielding, and, some would argue, needlessly aggressive. While his job was to maintain peace, Carl often blurred the lines between vigilance and unwarranted suspicion. To him, anyone who didn't fit his idea of a typical shopper was a potential problem. Today, that person was Samuel. As Samuel paused near a bench to orient himself, Carl pushed off the wall and strode toward him with purpose. His boots thudded against the tiled floor, drawing the attention of a few nearby shoppers. "Hey, you!" Carl's voice boomed, cutting through the noise of the food court. Samuel stopped mid-step, tilting his head slightly. He turned in the direction of the voice, his cane lightly tapping the floor in front of him. "Are you speaking to me?" he asked, his tone polite but cautious. "Yes, you," Carl snapped, his arms crossing over his chest. "What are you doing here?" Samuel's brows knitted together in confusion. "I'm shopping," he replied, his voice calm. "I came here to buy a gift for my niece." Carl scoffed, taking a step closer. "Shopping? Really? You've been wandering around here for a while now. Looks to me like you're just loitering." Samuel hesitated, his grip tightening slightly on his cane. I'm not loitering. I know where I'm going. I just take my time to make sure I don't get lost. Carl's expression hardened. That's convenient. Do you have proof you're actually here to shop? A receipt, a bag, anything? By now, a few heads had turned and a small group of bystanders began to take notice. A woman holding a tray of coffee frowned, pausing mid-step to watch the interaction. A man seated at a nearby table leaned back in his chair, arms folded. His curiosity piqued. Samuel remained composed, though his voice carried a hint of frustration. I haven't made my purchase yet. I was on my way to the store when you stopped me. Carl smirked, clearly unimpressed. Sure you were. We get people like you all the time, pretending to be innocent while casing the place. I've got a job to do, and that includes keeping an eye out for troublemakers. Troublemaker, Samuel repeated, disbelief creeping into his tone. I'm blind, not a thief. Carl rolled his eyes, his stance growing more aggressive. Blind or not, rules are rules. You can't just hang around here without a purpose. The crowd around them grew larger, a murmur spreading as more people began to realize what was happening. A teenager whispered to his friend, gesturing toward Carl and Samuel. A middle-aged woman shook her head, her expression a mix of discomfort and disapproval. Excuse me, Samuel said, his voice firm now. But I don't think it's your place to assume my intentions. I'm here for a reason, just like everyone else. Carl chuckled humorously. Oh, you think you're special. Let me tell you something. If you don't have proof of what you're doing here, I can ask you to leave. The young mother standing nearby turned to her husband, her voice low but audible. This doesn't feel right, she murmured. That man hasn't done anything wrong. Cried another. Samuel took a slow breath, steadying himself. I don't want any trouble. I'm just here to shop. If you let me... You're causing trouble by arguing with me, Carl interrupted, his tone sharp. Now I'm not going to ask again. Either you leave, or I'll escort you out myself. The tension in the air was palpable. By now, a small semicircle of onlookers had formed, their faces a mix of curiosity, discomfort, and quiet outrage. Some had their phones out, recording the scene. Others exchanged glances, silently questioning whether they should step in. The young woman standing near the edge of the crowd clenched her fists, her jaw tightening. Her name was Emily, a law student with a strong sense of justice. She'd been watching the exchange from the start, her heart pounding with indignation. As Carl stepped closer to Samuel, towering over him, she took a deep breath and pushed away through the onlookers. Excuse me? Emily said loudly, her voice cutting through the growing murmur of the crowd. All eyes turned to her as she stepped forward, placing herself between Carl and Samuel. What exactly do you think you're doing? Emily squared her shoulders as she stood between Carl and Samuel, her gaze unwavering. The young law student had been on her way to meet a friend when she first noticed the interaction. What began as mild curiosity had quickly morphed into indignation as she listened to Carl's harsh tone and unjust accusations. Now, standing in the middle of the scene, she could feel the weight of the crowd's eyes on her. Excuse me, she repeated firmly, directing her words at Carl. What exactly do you think you're doing? Carl's expression shifted, irritation flickering across his face. Ma'am, this is none of your concern. I'm doing my job, ensuring the safety of the mall. Emily didn't flinch. Safety? From what? A blind man trying to buy a gift for his niece? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're harassing someone who hasn't done anything wrong. The crowd murmured in agreement. A teenager whispered to his friend, Yeah, she's right. While an older man near the food court nodded silently. Carl's jaw tightened as the ripple of discontent spread through the onlookers. Look, I don't have to explain myself to you, Carl said, his voice rising. This man has been loitering, and I have every right to question him. Emily crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. And has he done anything to suggest he's a threat? Has he stolen anything, hurt anyone, or are you just making assumptions based on how he looks? Samuel, still standing quietly behind her, tilted his head slightly, as if trying to process the unexpected defense. He could feel the tension in the air, the sharp edges of Carl's anger clashing with the soft but firm resolve in Emily's voice. Carl took a step forward, his posture rigid. "Ma'am, I suggest you step aside before this gets out of hand." Emily didn't budge. "It's already out of hand because you made it that way. You're embarrassing yourself in this mall by treating an innocent man like a criminal." The crowd grew bolder. "She's right," someone called out. A woman with a stroller at it. "Leave him alone!" Another voice chimed in. "What's your problem, man?" She was... Carl's face reddened as the weight of the crowd's disapproval began to press down on him. He glanced around, his usual air of authority beginning to falter. "Everyone needs to calm down," he barked, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Emily saw her opening and pressed on. "You're the one who needs to calm down. And you owe Samuel an apology for how you've treated him." "Apology?" Carl scoffed, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm just doing my job." "Harassment isn't part of your job," Emily shot back. Her tone was steady, but her words were sharp. "Your job is to protect people, not to intimidate or humiliate them." The crowd murmured louder now, their collective disapproval growing more vocal. Phones were raised, capturing the interaction on video. Carl shifted uncomfortably, his usual air of control slipping further with each passing moment. A mother holding a child on her hip turned to the person next to her. "This is ridiculous," she said, loud enough for Carl to hear. "That man hasn't done a single thing wrong." Carl glanced around, the accusatory eyes of the crowd now firmly fixed on him. He raised a hand as if to regain control. "All right, everyone, just back off. This is between me and him." "No, it's not," Emily interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "It's between you and your inability to recognize your own bias. Samuel deserves respect, not this shameful display of power." The crowd erupted in agreement. "Yay!" Someone yelled, "Leave him alone!" More voices joined in, echoing their support for Samuel and their disdain for Carl's actions. Carl opened his mouth to respond, but his words were drowned out by the growing tide of voices. He looked to the edges of the crowd, searching for support, but found none. His face flushed with frustration and embarrassment as the realization dawned that he had lost control of the situation. Samuel, still standing quietly, finally spoke. "I don't want any trouble," he said softly, his voice carrying a mix of weariness and gratitude. "I just came here to shop." "And you should be able to," Emily said, turning to him with a reassuring smile. "Without being treated like this," the crowd cheered at her words, a wave of solidarity washing over them. Carl, now visibly flustered, took a step back, his earlier bravado reduced to silence. At that moment, a tall man in a suit appeared at the edge of the crowd, his expression calm but authoritative. The murmurs quieted as the mall manager stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. The crowd parted as the mall manager approached, his measured steps and sharp suit exuding authority. Mr. Peterson, a man known for his calm demeanor and fair judgment, had been alerted to the commotion by a flood of concerned calls from employees and shoppers. His expression was neutral, but his piercing gaze shifted between Carl and Samuel, assessing the situation. "We found anything?" "What's going on here?" Mr. Peterson asked, his voice calm but firm. The murmurs of the crowd quieted as they turned their attention to the unfolding scene. Carl straightened his posture, clearly grasping for control. "Sir, I was just doing my job. This man," he pointed at Samuel, "has been loitering and acting suspiciously. I was trying to ensure the safety of the mall." Samuel opened his mouth to respond, but Emily stepped forward instead. "That's not true," she said, her voice steady and clear. "This man," she gestured to Samuel, "was simply walking through the mall. He hasn't caused any trouble. But your security guard here has been harassing him. Without cause." The manager's eyes flicked to Emily, then back to Carl. "Is that so?" he said, his tone careful. "And we have any evidence of this alleged suspicious behavior? Was there any evidence missing what happened this morning or something I missed? Carl faltered for a moment. Well, no, but it's obvious. Look at him. He's been wandering around aimlessly. 'Cause he's blind, Emily shot back, her voice rising slightly. He's been navigating carefully, not aimlessly. There's a difference. The tension in Carl's face grew as the crowd murmured again, their support for Emily evident. Mr. Peterson raised a hand to silence them and turned to Samuel. Sir, can you tell me what happened? Samuel tilted his head slightly toward the manager, his voice calm but laced with wariness. I came here to buy a gift for my niece. I've been walking carefully to find the store I need. This man stopped me and accused me of loitering. I tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. Mr. Peterson nodded, his expression thoughtful. Thank you, sir. Please give me a moment. He turned to an employee standing nearby. Can you pull up the security footage for this area? I'd like to review it. Within minutes, the employee returned with a tablet in hand. Mr. Peterson watched the footage intently, the crowd leaning in as if they could see the screen themselves. The video showed Samuel moving cautiously through the mall, his cane tapping in front of him, while Carl approached him with an aggressive stance. The footage spoke volumes. The crowd's murmurs turned into a wave of quiet satisfaction as the truth became clear. Mr. Peterson looked up, his expression now tinged with disapproval. Carl, he said, his voice firm. This is unacceptable. Your actions were unprofessional and discriminatory. I've warned you about this behavior before, and this time I'm afraid I can't overlook it. Consider this your last day here. Carl's face turned a deep shade of red. Wait, what? You can't be serious. I was just... Enough, Master Peterson cut him off. I've seen enough. Please hand over your badge and leave the premises immediately. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the food court. Carl looked around, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. But no one stepped forward to support him. With a huff, he pulled off his badge and threw it onto the ground before storming off. Mr. Peterson turned back to Samuel, his tone softening. Sir, I want to personally apologize for what you've experienced here today. This is not how we treat our patrons. Please, allow me to make it right. Samuel stood silently, gripping his cane as the tension in the air began to dissolve. The applause from the crowd slowly faded, replaced by murmurs of approval and satisfaction. Mr. Peterson stepped closer, his expression now one of genuine concern and remorse. Mr. Samuel, he began addressing him respectfully, on behalf of the Grand Plaza Mall, I want to extend my deepest apologies for the behavior you've endured. It was completely unacceptable, and I assure you, we will take steps to ensure nothing like this happens again. Samuel tilted his head slightly toward Mr. Peterson, his lips forming a small, weary smile. Thank you, he said softly. I just wanted to shop, like anyone else. Mr. Peterson nodded, his tone earnest. And that's exactly what you should be able to do without fear of harassment. To make amends, I'd like to offer you this. He handed Samuel a small envelope. It's a gift card that you can use at any store in the mall. It's the least we can do. And the crowd, still lingering, watched the interaction with quiet approval. Several people nodded in agreement, while others whispered among themselves about how justice had been served. Emily, standing by Samuel's side, placed a gentle hand on his arm. You handled that with so much grace, she said. Not many people would have stayed so calm. Samuel turned toward her, his smile widening. Thank you. But honestly, I couldn't have done it without you. I didn't expect anyone to stand up for me. Emily shrugged modestly. It was the right thing to do. We all have a responsibility to stand up when we see something wrong. It's how we make the world a better place, little by little. The words hung in the air, resonating with the crowd. A young boy tugged on his mother's sleeve, asking, Mom, why was that man so mean to him? The mother knelt down, whispering something about kindness and fairness. Around them, people began to disperse, some stopping briefly to pat Samuel on the shoulder, or exchange a few kind words before continuing with their day. As the crowd thinned, Mr. Peterson turned to Emily. "Thank you for stepping in," he said. "It's people like you who remind us to do better." Emily nodded, her gaze returning to Samuel. "You're stronger than you think," she said. "And your patience? That's inspiring." Samuel chuckled softly. "I guess it's a survival skill. But today I felt like I wasn't alone." With those words, a sense of quiet triumph filled the space. Samuel's head lifted slightly higher, his confidence bolstered by the collective support he'd received. Emily smiled at him, her own heart lightened by the impact of a simple act of courage. As the two parted ways, the mall seemed a little brighter, a little kinder. The incident, though painful, had brought strangers together and reminded them all of the power of standing up for what's right. In the end, it wasn't just about Samuel. It was about a community coming together to restore dignity and justice. And that was a victory worth remembering. As we come to the end of this story, we're reminded of the incredible impact one small act of courage can have. Emily's willingness to step up and defend Samuel, and the collective support of the crowd, turned what could have been a moment of injustice into a powerful example of solidarity and kindness. And what would you have done in this situation? Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and reflections can inspire others to take a stand when it matters most. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and share it with friends and family. By spreading messages like these, we create a ripple effect of awareness and compassion. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an uplifting story like this one. Kindness has the power to change lives, not just for those who receive it, but also for those who give it. Let's all strive to be a little more like Emily, courageous, compassionate, and unafraid to stand up for what's right. Together, we can build a world where everyone feels seen, respected, and valued. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story. Stay kind, stay strong, and take care.